I always believed that the worst kind of betrayal came from strangers, from people who barely knew your name. I was wrong. The real damage comes quietly from the ones who smile at you across the dinner table, the ones who claim they love your family as much as you do. I learned that lesson the day I returned from a business trip and felt the world shift beneath my feet, though at the time, I couldn't understand why the air around me felt colder, heavier, almost warning me that something was terribly off. Nothing prepares you for the moment you sense your life has been tampered with in your absence. It starts as a whisper in your chest, a tightening in your stomach, the kind of instinct you can't explain but can't ignore. I didn't know it yet, but a decision had been made behind my back, one that would unravel the thin trust one had left in my family and ignite a kind of anger I had never experienced before. An anger sharp enough to keep me awake at night, replaying every small sign I had brushed aside. I thought I was coming home to my routine, my comfort, my freedom. Instead, I walked straight into the aftermath of a choice so selfish, so reckless, it felt like a personal attack on everything I had worked for. And the worst part? They truly believed I would accept it. But what happens when the quiet, dependable one finally decides to fight back? Before everything fell apart, my life had a rhythm I trusted. I wasn't someone who craved chaos or drama. I valued structure, predictability, and the quiet sense of control that came from building a life on my own terms. Most days began before sunrise, the soft glow of my apartment easing me into a schedule I had shaped with care. I had worked hard for a career I loved, one that demanded long hours, business trips, and decisions that carried weight, but it also gave me independence, pride, and the comfort of knowing I had earned every piece of my world. Weekends were my reset button. I'd take my Porsche out for a drive before the city woke up, letting the early morning air calm my mind. That car wasn't just a vehicle, it was a symbol of every sacrifice, every late night, every moment I doubted myself, but kept going. People saw luxury, I saw proof. Proof that I had survived things they never knew about. Proof that I could stand on my own. Proof that no one's opinion or interference could steer my life without my permission. My family, though imperfect, was still part of my routine. My father had remarried a few years earlier, and while I tried to accept his new wife, there was always a subtle tension between us. Not outright hostility, just something colder, quieter. She was skilled at wearing kindness like a polished accessory, but every now and then, I'd catch a flicker in her eyes that felt more calculating than warm. I tried not to dwell on it. My father was happy, and that mattered more than my discomfort. My younger sister, on the other hand, lived in a world of her own, filled with impulsive decisions, romantic fantasies, and a kind of recklessness I couldn't afford. She'd call me for advice she rarely followed, or for help she insisted she'd repay, but never did. I loved her, but loving her often meant bracing myself for whatever storm she had created that week. Still, I never imagined she'd be part of anything that would truly hurt me. Not intentionally, at least. Looking back, I realized there were signs, small, steady hints that something was shifting while my attention was on work, deadlines, and the endless list of responsibilities that came with my job. Little comments about money, passing remarks about sacrifices or fairness. My stepmother's sudden interest in my finances. My sister's increasing impatience with the cost of her upcoming honeymoon. I brushed it all off, assuming it was just typical family noise. Nothing serious. Nothing threatening. But tension has a way of hiding in plain sight. It sits quietly, waiting for the moment you're distracted, tired, or far enough away that the people around you convince themselves you won't notice what they're about to do. When my company sent me on a short business trip, I didn't think twice. I packed my bags, organized my calendar, double-checked everything in my apartment, and left with the familiar comfort that I'd return to the same life I always did. I had no reason to worry. No reason to expect anything out of the ordinary. But sometimes betrayal doesn't announce itself. Sometimes it waits until your guard is down, until you're miles away from home, until the people you trust, or want to trust, convince themselves that your success is something they're entitled to. I didn't know it then, but while I was focused on meetings and presentations, a choice was being made in my absence. A choice that would tear apart the fragile threads of trust I'd been holding onto. A choice so selfish and astonishing that even now, part of me struggles to understand how they justified it. And what makes it worse is how easily they seemed to believe I wouldn't fight back. But they underestimated the one thing they should have feared the most, the quiet, dangerous calm that comes before my storm. The first sign that something was wrong hit me before I even unlocked my front door. It was a strange heaviness in the atmosphere, as if my home itself was bracing for my reaction. I stood there for a moment, suitcase in hand, trying to shake off the feeling. I had just come back from 3 exhausting days of meetings, travel, and last-minute negotiations. All I wanted was a shower, a warm meal, and a good night's sleep. But that uneasy tension pulled at me, whispering that rest wasn't coming. When I finally walked into the building's underground parking lot, the echo of my own footsteps felt unnaturally loud. I kept glancing toward the space where my Porsche should have been waiting, sleek and familiar. I didn't rush. I didn't panic. I just walked with the same calm certainty I always had when coming home. But the moment I reached the spot, something inside me cracked open. The space was empty. Not temporarily empty. Not mistakenly empty. Just gone. I froze, staring at the bare concrete as if my eyes needed time to adjust, as if the car might suddenly appear once my brain caught up. But the truth settled painfully fast. My chest tightened, and a slow, cold dread ran down my spine. The car wasn't here. Not parked elsewhere. Not moved for maintenance. Not misplaced. It was gone. At first, I fought the rising panic. I reminded myself that there could be a rational explanation. Maybe management had shifted a few vehicles for cleaning or repairs. Maybe there had been a mistake in the system. Maybe anything but what my gut was silently screaming. I marched back upstairs, dropped my luggage, and started checking my phone for notifications. No alerts from the building. No towing warnings. No emails about parking disruptions. Nothing. The silence wasn't comforting. It was incriminating. As I paced through my apartment, I kept replaying the last few days, trying to connect that didn't exist yet. But the tension, the odd comments before I left, the lingering looks, they all started resurfacing like puzzle pieces I had ignored. Something had happened while I was away. Something intentional. It wasn't until I logged into my car tracking app that the truth finally hit me full force. The system showed the last location. Not a lot. Not anywhere near my home. It was listed as transferred, ownership updated. Transferred, ownership updated. Those 2 words hollowed out my stomach. My hands trembled as I dug deeper into the digital trail, and what I found made my blood run cold. The sale had been processed 2 days earlier. A dealership I recognized. A price I knew was less than the car deserved. And the signature used to authorize it. It was my stepmother's handwriting. Suddenly, everything made horrifying sense. The tension. The secrecy. My sister's sudden desperation to fund her honeymoon. My stepmother's sharp comments about fairness and how some people had more than they needed. They had done it. They had actually sold my car. They had taken something I worked for, something that symbolized years of sweat and sacrifice, and traded it away like it was spare furniture. And they did it while I was hundreds of miles away. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My mind raced, not with confusion, but with a hard, growing fury I didn't recognize in myself. I wasn't someone who broke down easily. I didn't lash out or crumble. But this was a violation so personal, so calculated, that it felt like someone had reached into my chest and stripped away a piece of my identity. I tried to steady myself. I walked to the kitchen, drank water, and tried to focus on the rhythm of my heartbeat. But the anger only intensified, building with every breath. It wasn't just the car. It was the audacity, the disrespect, the betrayal wrapped in entitlement. They thought I wouldn't question it. They thought I wouldn't fight back. They thought I was predictable, quiet, too calm to be dangerous. But they had no idea what they had awakened. The next morning, I drove a rental car to the dealership listed in the transfer. I walked in with a steady posture, my expression unreadable. The staff recognized the car immediately. It had already been sold again. Another transfer. Another lost trail. But the paperwork that told the real story. A forged authorization. A rushed sale. A price far below market value. My stepmother had acted as if she held full rights, as if my possessions were nothing more than community property for her convenience. I left the dealership with a thick stack of printed records. Evidence. Proof. I sat in the car and scanned through every line, every signature, every timestamp. Each detail fueled the fire burning inside me. But as furious as I was, I forced myself to stay calm. Revenge wasn't about screaming or impulsive reactions. It was about precision, strategy, ensuring that the people who underestimated me would finally understand who they had crossed. Back home, I began piecing together the timeline. My sister's social media posts painted the picture clearly. She and her fiancé were bragging about unexpected blessings and honeymoon upgrades paid for by family support. She had no shame, no guilt, no hesitation. And my stepmother? Her posts were even worse, thinly veiled justifications, as if she believed the universe had granted her the moral right to take what wasn't hers. As if my success was something she could redistribute whenever her daughter needed more. Each photo, each caption, each smug expression, they all pushed me deeper into that cold, focused determination I hadn't felt in years. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't a moment of weakness. This was a plan, a calculated decision, a betrayal carried out with full confidence that I would swallow it quietly. And that assumption would be their downfall. I began gathering everything: bank statements, transfer records, emails, messages, timestamps. I documented every inconsistency, every forged element, every violation. I spoke with a friend who understood legal loopholes. I learned exactly how property theft disguised as a family decision could be unraveled. Piece by piece, I built a case so airtight that even my stepmother's polished smile wouldn't save her. But revenge wasn't just about reclaiming what was stolen. It was about exposing the entitlement and hypocrisy buried beneath years of fake smiles and condescending comments. It was about making sure they never dared to underestimate me again. The more I dug, the more secrets surfaced. My stepmother had debts she had hidden. My sister had pressured her into speeding up the sale to avoid losing honeymoon reservations. My father knew nothing. He had been kept intentionally in the dark. And that gave me leverage they never expected. The next few days were a whirlwind of preparation. Calls, meetings, documents, arrangements. A plan formed so sharply and cleanly that even I was surprised at how naturally it came to me. But the moment everything snapped into place, the moment I realized exactly how to execute my revenge, was when I discovered a final detail on the dealership's records. A note added by the sales rep. Seller appeared urgently. Said the owner wouldn't be returning for a long time. They assumed I'd be gone. Unavailable. Powerless. They weren't just stealing a car. They were erasing me. That was the moment I stopped replaying what they did and started envisioning what I would do. What would it look like when I finally confronted them? How would they react when they realized everything they built on lies was about to collapse? What would happen when the consequences they never expected came crashing down? I didn't have all the answers yet, but one thing was certain. They had no idea how far I was willing to go, and they were about to find out. The day everything came to a head didn't feel dramatic at first. It started with the same quiet morning light, the same routine, the same calm exterior I'd practiced so carefully. But underneath it all, there was a sharpness in me, an electric awareness that today was different. Today wasn't about gathering evidence or quietly preparing. Today was the moment everything I'd uncovered, everything I'd planned, finally converged. I arrived at my father's house earlier than anyone expected, carrying a folder thick with documents. Every forged signature, every bank transfer, every fraudulent authorization. I had rehearsed what I would do, but nothing could fully prepare me for the rush of adrenaline as I stepped inside and found them there together. My father, my stepmother, and my sister, seated around the dining table as if nothing in the world was amiss. For a moment, I just stood there, taking in the image. The sunlight drifted across the room. My father relaxed, unaware. My stepmother offered that familiar tight smile. My sister scrolled her phone, completely unbothered. It was almost laughable. They looked so calm, so satisfied, as if the world had rewarded them for their audacity. They had no idea what was about to hit them. I placed the folder on the table, letting the weight of it echo in the silence. My stepmother's smile faltered. My sister's phone slipped slightly in her hand. My father's brow furrowed with confusion. I didn't say anything at first. I didn't need to. I simply opened the folder and began laying out the documents piece by piece, like the final reveal of a puzzle they never realized I was assembling. As each page landed on the table, their expressions shifted. Confusion turned to recognition. Recognition turned to fear. Fear turned to panic. My father kept trying to make sense of it, scanning the papers with shaking hands, his face growing paler with every detail he read. He hadn't known. And now he was seeing it all at once. The forged signature, the underpriced sale, the rushed transaction. The betrayal committed by his own wife and enabled by his youngest daughter. My stepmother tried to mask her panic with indignation, but the evidence was too detailed, too solid, too damning. Every lie she had crafted unraveled in seconds. My sister's confidence shattered even faster. The entitlement she carried like armor fell away as she realized exactly how deep they were in. I wasn't yelling. I wasn't shaking. I was calmer than I had been in days. That was what terrified them most. My silence. My composure. The steady clarity in my eyes that told them this wasn't a plea for justice. It was a controlled dismantling of their scheme, and I had complete command over every outcome. The room grew tighter, heavier, as I laid out the consequences they were facing. The fraudulent authorization meant my stepmother had committed a criminal offense. The bank statements proved she had accessed accounts she had no right to touch. The dealership records confirmed the intent behind the sale. And my sister, she had benefited from stolen assets, participating in the scheme even if she hadn't signed the papers herself. The truth hit them harder than I expected. My stepmother's mask cracked completely. She couldn't hide behind charm or manipulation. She couldn't twist the narrative or talk her way out of it. She knew exactly what these documents meant for her. Legal action, financial liability, public humiliation. Every outcome she never imagined she'd face. My sister looked at me with a mix of guilt and disbelief, as if she still expected me to soften, to let her explain, to forgive her simply because we shared blood. She didn't understand that this wasn't about anger anymore. It was about boundaries, accountability, self-respect. It was about choosing myself over their selfishness for the first time in years. My father kept apologizing, but his words barely reached me. His shock was real, his hurt palpable, but the choices hadn't been his. He was another casualty of their manipulation. And I knew he would have to face that truth on his own. I outlined exactly what would happen next. The formal complaint I was prepared to file. The legal consequences they would face. The financial restitution I would demand. The impact these actions would have on their futures. Every word landed like a strike, not shouted, but delivered with quiet, decisive force. And then came the moment that shifted everything. The moment my stepmother realized I wasn't bluffing, that there was no loophole for her to slip through, no emotional leverage she could use against me. For the first time since she entered our lives, she had no power. None. Her voice cracked. Her composure shattered. She wasn't even pretending anymore. My sister crumbled in her own way, overwhelmed by a reality she never thought she'd face. She had expected a slap on the wrist at most, a temporary argument, a dramatic family moment that would eventually fade. But this was life-altering. Watching them unravel didn't bring me joy. It brought clarity. They had built their world on the assumption that I would always be the stable one, the forgiving one, the one who carried the consequences of their recklessness. But that version of me didn't exist anymore. They had destroyed her the moment they decided my belongings were theirs to distribute. Still, revenge wasn't about screaming or vindictive pleasure. It was about truth, accountability, finally forcing the people who had dismissed me to see exactly who I was and what I was capable of. I handed my stepmother one final document. A choice. Either she repaid every cent the car was worth, in full, through a formal agreement that protected me legally, or I would proceed with the charges immediately, without hesitation. The silence that followed was suffocating. My father lowered his head, devastated. My sister broke down completely. And my stepmother, once so confident, so composed, stared at the papers with hollow eyes, knowing that every road ahead of her led to consequences she never thought she'd face. I stood there quietly, watching the weight of their actions finally sink in. This was the turning point. The moment everything they had taken from me came back, not as a restored possession, but as power. And yet, even as I watched them unravel, a single, unexpected thought crossed my mind. Was this enough? Or was there still more they needed to learn? That question lingered in the air like a storm cloud, unspoken but electric. And the answer would determine exactly how the rest of the story unfolded. In the days that followed, the house felt different, quieter, fractured in a way that could never be fully repaired. The agreement I had placed in front of my stepmother wasn't just a document. It was the line she never expected me to draw. She signed it with a trembling hand, the ink smudged slightly where her grip faltered. My sister watched with a look I couldn't fully decipher, part shame, part disbelief, part realization that the version of me she had taken for granted was gone. The repayment didn't come instantly. It arrived in installments, each transfer a reminder of the consequences they had earned through their own choices. Every deposit into my account wasn't just money, it was proof. Proof that justice, even slow justice, was still justice. Proof that I wasn't powerless. Proof that they no longer had unrestricted access to my life. My father kept his distance for a while, processing the fallout he never saw coming. I didn't blame him. He wasn't the architect of the betrayal, but he had lived so comfortably in the illusion of family harmony that he never questioned the cracks beneath it. When he finally reached out, it wasn't with excuses or defenses. It was with quiet remorse and a kind of gratitude I didn't expect, gratitude that I handled what he didn't have the strength to face. My stepmother retreated into herself after the confrontation. Her polished smiles vanished, replaced by a tension she could no longer disguise. She avoided me, avoided the mirror, avoided anything that forced her to acknowledge the selfishness that had defined her choices. She had built her identity on control, her household, her image, her influence over my father. But that illusion shattered the moment she realized I wasn't someone she could manipulate. My sister, on the other hand, reacted differently. The entitlement she once wielded like a shield dissolved into something more human, regret, maybe even guilt. She sent messages she didn't expect me to respond to. Paragraphs of apologies. Explanations that didn't excuse anything but revealed a truth I had long suspected. She was too used to being saved. Too used to believing anyone, would clean up after her messes. It wasn't that she didn't know the difference between right and wrong. It was that she had never been forced to face the cost of her choices. Revenge didn't erase those dynamics, but it changed them. Permanently. I didn't pursue criminal charges. Not because I lacked the grounds, they were solid, undeniable, but because I didn't need the public spectacle. I didn't need the courtroom, the headlines, the judgment of strangers. My goal wasn't to ruin their lives. It was to reclaim mine. And in that pursuit, I succeeded completely. Once the financial restitution was secured, I took time to rebuild parts of myself I hadn't realized were damaged. I bought a replacement for the Porsche, not the exact model, but something better suited to who I had become. I drove it not with pride in the material, but with pride in the journey. Every turn on the road felt like a reminder that I had stood up for myself in a way the old me would never have dared. But the true impact wasn't in the car, the money, or even the justice that unfolded. The true impact lived in the quieter moments, those first mornings when I woke up without anger tightening my chest, or the nights when I sat in silence and recognized a calm that had been missing for years. Revenge, I discovered, isn't the fire people imagine it to be. It's not an explosion. It's the aftermath. the clarity, the understanding of who you truly are when everything familiar is taken away and you're forced to rebuild from a place of truth instead of illusion. My stepmother learned the limits of her influence. My sister learned the weight of consequences. My father learned that silence from the people you love can be its own form of betrayal. And I learned something more valuable than anything they took from me. I learned that protecting yourself isn't cruelty. Setting boundaries isn't selfishness. Walking away from those who misuse your trust isn't abandonment. It's survival. It's self-respect. It's choosing peace over pain. The revenge I carried out didn't destroy me. It freed me. It taught me that justice isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet, methodical, and deliberate. Sometimes it looks like paperwork, signed agreements, and the steady rebuilding of what was stolen. And sometimes it looks like stepping into a new chapter of your life without the people who once expected you to shrink just to make room for their comfort. But even after the dust settled, one question lingered in the back of my mind, one I couldn't shake, no matter how much closure I gained. How many people out there are living just like I did, trusting the wrong ones, ignoring the signs, convincing themselves that betrayal could never come from the people closest to them? Maybe that's why I'm sharing this story. Not for sympathy, not for validation, but for the person watching who feels that familiar tightening in their chest, the instinct that something isn't right, the fear of what they might uncover if they dig deeper. If my story teaches anything, it's this. You don't need permission to protect what's yours. You don't need to justify your boundaries. And you don't need to wait for someone to make things right when you already have the strength to do it yourself. Because at the end of the day, revenge isn't about hurting someone who hurt you. It's about reclaiming the parts of yourself they never should have touched in the first place. So now I'll ask you just one question. When someone crosses a line you can't ignore, will you stay silent? Or will you finally choose yourself?